Good afternoon, everyone. Everyone's having a good time talking here. You can't hear? Okay, can we have it? Great, what a great turnout. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it. All of you in the audience here and also on Zoom. Okay, do we have any way of turning up the mics in here? How's that? Is that better? Okay, I'll do my best. I won't be on for long, so you don't have to worry about that. I can tell it's better now. Anyway, welcome to Water and Climate Change on Cape Cod, What You Should Know. My name is Rich Levy, and I'm currently the chair of the Marine and Freshwater Quality Committee for Orleans. And this meeting is the culmination of discussions that we had as a committee. And we're excited that we were able to bring this to fruition. And while there have been a number of climate change meetings going on Cape Cod, you'll see as we go along that the connection here is very specific, particularly toward the end on our local waters. According to the United Nations, climate change is primarily a water crisis. Sustainable water management is central to building the resilience of societies and ecosystems and to reducing carbon emissions. Everyone has a role to play, and actions at the individual and household levels are vital. And we're hoping that that will come out as the theme as we go through the meeting today. Now, before we actually begin, I'd like to recognize our two committee members who organized this meeting. Over in the corner here, hiding out, Mary Griffin and Valerie May. Thank you so much for all the work you did. I'd also like to thank the Snows Library Assistant Director, Kaimi Lum, who's not here today, as she was instrumental in putting together the logistics of the program in place, and the Friends of the Snow Library for allowing us to use their audiovisual equipment. And special thanks to Andy O'Neill, who I don't know if you can see him, he's hiding in the back there. He's helped us out with all the technical requirements for all the speakers, and he's also organized the Zoom meeting. And there will be a recording of this that we'll make available to you. I'd like to also recognize the support of our sister committees in Orleans, the Orleans Energy and Climate Action Committee, as well as the Shellfish and Waterways Improvement Advisory Committees. And we have members here today of them. Also like to thank the Orleans Pond Coalition, the Orleans Conservation Trust, and the Orleans Action Climate Network for providing us with some of the marketing to get all of you here and online. So now I would like to start off by introducing our moderator for today, Shelley McComb, who's right here. Shelley is the Coastal Resilience Specialist for the Barnstable County through the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension and Woods Hole Sea Grant. She earned a master's degree in environmental and sustainability studies from the College of Charleston, where she worked with municipal resource managers on sea level rise policy. So without any further delays, I'd like to introduce Shelley, and she will be moderating the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Oh, I'm a little short. Thank you, Rich, for the warm welcome. And thank you all so much for being here. I'm so excited to be here to cross-promote this event as part of our Cape Cod Coastal Resilience Week, which has been going on all week and wraps up tomorrow with our pre-symphony storytelling. So if you guys haven't gotten tickets to the Cape Cod Symphony, you totally should. Just a few quick housekeeping things before we get started. There's some refreshments over in the corner, so please help yourself. If you sign up for our email list in the back, we will send you all a follow-up email with a link to the Zoom recording. It's also going to be posted on the Orleans Marine and Freshwater Quality Committee website. And just as we're going through, we're going to save all of our questions for our speakers. We're going to have a panel at the end, but if you have any super burning questions, we can do those between speakers. So without further ado, we are going to welcome our first speaker to the front. Rich Delaney is the Executive Director of the Center for Coastal Studies. Let's give him a hand.
Right. Thank you, Shelley, and hello, neighbors and friends. It's really nice to be able to spend the time just 2 miles down the street from my house instead of driving or flying all over the world. So my talk this morning will be just to set the stage a little bit about climate change, big picture stuff, international, national, and most importantly, what's happening locally, which you'll hear about from Katie and Mark later on, because that's where the action really must happen in total to make things different or to slow down climate change. So I'm going to start right away with what I'm calling the climate change overview. I am the executive director, or at least the interim executive director of the Center for Coastal Studies. I retired once and that didn't work. My retirement didn't work out. The board of directors called out to the bullpen and said, could I come back in and pitch 3 more innings? And I'm in the 3rd inning now. So we'll have a new director working with Katie pretty soon. But what you should know about climate change, well, you should know the science is settled. It's undisputable right now. We've had the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, 2,000 or 3,000 eminent scientists around the world, all disciplines, looking at this issue for a long time. They've published 6 major reports. There's no doubt that the Earth is warming faster than ever in our recorded history. So the science is settled. And just to illustrate that a little further and to explain why some of the naysayers, and unfortunately there are still some, even more tragically, some of them are in the United States Congress, and even catastrophically bad, there may be someone in the White House one day that doesn't believe it. But I'm not going to talk politics yet. So if you go back 1,000 years, well, more than that, yeah, about 1,000 years of recorded history, you see those little lines about departure from mean average temperature. Yes, we have had colder periods and warmer periods. And some people say, well, look, we had a real cold spot here or a real hot spot. Yes, those true. Those are natural variations. But look what did I do wrong? Look at what has been happening since about the Industrial Revolution, 1850s. That's when things began to change in our world. When we started using fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas, in vast quantities. And that's when these lines started to escalate, and now they're going up here. And by the way, this chart only goes to 2000. So it's been another 24 years of that red line going like that. So the science is settled. That's one thing you should know. And I like this particular slide because it is a hockey stick up there. And if I weren't with you guys right now, I'd be down at Charles Moore Rink playing hockey with the old timers. But I'm happy to be with you. So here's a little bit more on what happens, what we've learned. We know that if the temperature keeps rising, this is the average temperature of the Earth above where it was in 1850 at the Industrial Revolution, right? So we know that if it goes up to what we call business as usual over there on this side, we could hit by 2100 4 degrees warmer. We could heat, this would be catastrophic, 5 degrees. Just a fraction of a degree changes a lot of things. So what happens is the United Nations in Paris in 2015 set the target. They said we should try to take every step we can as a society, as 197 or 196 countries, to limit our emissions of carbon dioxide such that the average temperature of the Earth won't go for, I'm sorry, guys, my fingers are higher than that. And a few of the nations that were present in Paris at the Climate Accord, which was a pivotal moment, we are what they call small island developing states. There are a lot of them. There are about 60 of them that are nations, most of them islands, very low line. At 2 degrees Celsius warming, many of them will be gone. Right? So they said, please set the goal at 1.5 or the target. Let's not go more than 1.5. Ultimately, in the end, the politics ended up at 2, but with an idea that maybe if everyone stretched a little further. Well, the sad news is we're already at 1.5. And if we're going to we're going to stop it at 2, we've got to take urgent, dramatic, globally wide actions that they'll talk about in a little bit. One other little dynamic, the earth is warming and the oceans are warming with it, but none of this is happening homogeneously. It varies around the world. And we happen to be in the front row seat for the warmest, fastest warming ocean water in the world. Well, I shouldn't say that. The Arctic probably is. But after that, the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than almost any other place, which means our impacts from climate change on the ocean and then on us are intensified. So you can see how that's happening. Why is that important? Well, oceans and climate and people are inextricably linked, right? And some people, and when I first learned about this, 50% of the oxygen that we're breathing right now is produced in the ocean, right? So a little fact, I mean, maybe you remember that from biology class. I didn't, but that means, trees produce, they take in carbon dioxide to do photosynthesis, and then they release oxygen. And that's why the Amazon rainforest is so absolutely critical. One of the many reasons. But the oceans also have vegetation in them. Microscopic algae in the top 2 or 3 millimeters of the ocean produce oxygen. Okay? So that's where a lot of that comes from. And it is a huge volume. And the 50% is not just because we live by the ocean. That's a global debt. The other thing that oceans do is they sequester. The ocean has been taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, right? Because it precipitates out of the atmosphere, and the more we put in, the more precipitates or falls onto the ocean. Carbon dioxide is CO2, if you remember your chemistry. Falls in the ocean, it combines with another molecule of oxygen, and it becomes CO3, which is carbonic acid. So not only is the ocean doing us a favor, taking carbon dioxide out, but it's hurting itself because it's acidifying. One of the many impacts and linkages between oceans, climate, and us. And you know the rest. Oceans drive our weather systems here, and particularly in the developing world, they provide the major source of protein for a lot of countries and a lot of people. And they've been absorbing heat, excess heat as well, for the last 200 years. But the oceans have been reaching their assimilative capacity. They're not going to be able to do this much longer. So that's another major worry for us vis-a-vis climate change. And Katie and Mark will elaborate on some of these, but here are just a quick list of some of the ways that climate is changing oceans and Cape Cod. Average temperatures are rising. I just mentioned the acidity. You're clearly aware of sea level rise. As the oceans melt, the Arctic and the Antarctic ice sheets, more water is in the ocean, and as it's warmer, it expands. All of that driving sea level up, causing increased erosion. That has also had secondary effects of what we call saltwater intrusion. As the sea level rises, it pushes pressure onto the groundwater, and then you have groundwater, salt water going into your groundwater. Habitats are shifting. Some of our lobster habitat and has been moving north to Maine because the water's too warm. So they seek colder waters. Anyway, there's a lot of impacts, and all of them are quite alarming. But I mentioned Paris already. The good news is, after probably, well, it's too long, I don't know what number to put on it, decades and decades, global leaders finally came together in Paris at what is called the COP21, the Conference of the Parties. That's the conference of all the United Nations parties. The parties of the country, there are about 197 that were in Paris and signed the most important document we've had in history, I think, the climate accord. It's for the first time, 196 countries, leaders agreed on every word of a I don't know how many dozen pages there were in this accord, a lot. And all it's doing is trying to set the stage and give us a strategy to slow climate change. We're not going to reverse it at this point. We're not going to stop it cold in its tracks. All we can do is hopefully slow it down so that those targets that I talked about in that thermometer are met before it gets to 4 and 5 degrees Celsius. Beyond the leaders, and this is what gives me the most hope when I talk about climate change, not only were the presidents committing their countries, and they were voluntary commitments, and you can imagine they're not all being implemented as well and as thoroughly as we would have liked, but they're out there and they're rallying points for people. But at the same time, there are leaders from cities, mayors and councilors from 2,250 cities, lots of corporations, many of them genuinely trying to contribute to the solution and not just showing up to do greenwashing. Lots of investors, Bill Gates and a lot of his billionaire parties were there and created a huge multi-trillion-dollar investment fund. And there are lots of other nonprofits like ourselves. So that really gives me encouragement that there is a widespread, deep response to climate change going on beyond government leaders. They're key, but there's a lot of other solutions as well. I mentioned COP21, which was Paris. That's coming up almost in 10 years, which unfortunately is a lot of time before we really made a lot of progress. But we try to measure the global leaders through the United Nations, tries to take stock of how much progress is being made collectively by the 196 countries each year. And so every year since Paris, they've been coming back together. The last year was in November, last meeting, COP28, was in Dubai, right? And some of the outcomes were actually fairly promising. For the first time in the Dubai Agreement, the language, the words fossil fuel were actually used. So if you think about that for a minute, that's encouraging. But what happened the 27 times that they met before and were afraid, I'm not afraid if that's the right word, but did not put the obvious problem in the agreement? That's the discouraging part for me. The United Nations has brought leaders together 28 times. After 21 times, they finally signed the Paris Accord. That was good. And then there've been 5 more meetings, whatever it is. And now we're at COP28 and the language finally allowed in it says that's the problem. We're burning fossil fuels. That indicates to me the power of the fossil fuel industry. They kept those words out of the agreement for all those years. Right? And even the language, I won't go into all the details, but the negotiations during 2 weeks, I've gone to all these COP meetings. So I was there promoting oceans, but I wasn't on the inner circle, but I was on the outside. But those people who were in the inner circle negotiating, the leaders, the presidents, had a hard time, and they compromised finally on saying, we are going to begin to get to the end of a fossil fuel era in a just and equitable way. Just and equitable is a good thing to put in that thing, but it's just the language is still soft. There's no commitment there, no timetable, nothing. So I look at this and try to be hopeful, but at the same time, I say, hey guys, we're running out of time. You know, they got to be stronger than that. They did have some other agreements. Every country agreed to try to triple its renewable energy capacity. That's good because that's the major way we're going to transition from fossil fuel to a renewable energy economy. All the countries signed a document saying we're going to double our energy efficiency. Conservation is a key part of the whole strategy. And we're going to stop deforestation. We're going to do whatever we can to keep, because once, as I mentioned earlier, forests are part of that whole healthy ecosystem that sequesters carbon dioxide. And the other debate that's going on, and this is interesting, I think, the global The problem with climate change, or the cause of climate change, is primarily the countries in the Northern Hemisphere. And frankly, it's us. It's the United States has been the biggest culprit, the major driver of climate change from day one. We got to face that fact. I think I'll show you some numbers in a minute. The countries that are being impacted the most tend to be in the southern part of the global hemisphere and are less developed and are suffering the consequences. So and each one of the COP meetings, there was a lot of discussion about from the southern hemispheric countries saying to us and other developed countries in the north, what's fair? I mean, we're suffering the losses and damage. You guys are benefiting with your economy and your comfortable way of life. Pay up. And finally, the United States and other countries agreed to fund, to a large degree, I forget the numbers, a fund that will transfer wealth from the north to the south to allow them to compensate for damages and become renewable-based countries as well. So here's another way to measure that. If you think about us as individuals, we all are a part of the problem and can be part of the solution. But if you measure carbon dioxide emissions, which is the big problem, by per capita, right? Saudi Arabia happens to be up there high because there are fewer in numbers and they have all the oil production. So that's a little bit of an aberration. But look at us, 17.6 metric tons per capita. Okay? So once again, we're way in the lead. Canada, Australia, you can read the numbers. And after you get down here, this chart goes down through all the rest of the countries in the world. I couldn't show them all, but the rest of them are down around 5, 4, and most of the majority are 1. We're at 17. So that should be an eye opener for us. Not only are we the culprit, but we have the resources to begin to turn this around. We have the means, the economy, the institutions, the laws. It's just a matter of will. This is countries with the highest per capita emissions in metric tons. So we can measure how many metric tons of carbon dioxide are going to the atmosphere, all right? Globally. And then you say, okay, per person, you divide the population into the metric tons from the United States, all right? So in the United States, per capita, per person, there are 17.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide going to the atmosphere. China was down low. This again is a little bit dated, but China is lower. Yep. Per capita, even though they have a billion people, right? So you try to divide a bigger denominator into the, if you follow the math. But I don't know if my next chart shows it, because there are so many people producing less total, they're now #1 carbon dioxide emitter today. This is historic, but so you got to look at this different ways. Historically, it's been us. Per capita, we're tops. Now China has reached total emissions because of their billions of people.
Is it fair to say that some of those, like particularly Saudi Arabia, Canada, Australia, is because they produce a lot of hydrocarbons?
Yes.
By doing that, they emit a lot of gas. So it's associated with the fact that they're big producers.
True.
Rich, can you repeat his question?
Yeah, that's so the question is Saudi Arabia and Australia big producers of fossil fuels, which it also is in just production contributes to large amounts of metric. Yeah.
It doesn't mean really consumption. It just means that this is the total that the country gets divided by population, which explained by the way why China is so low. Is because not only they're not producing hydrocarbons, but they have one of the biggest populations in the world.
That's right. So we'll come back, we can come back to have more questions at the end, but that's a good point. So this is total CO2 production, some of emissions, some from the production. A lot of, the rest of it is from consumption. We are producing products because we consume them. So I don't like to go run over my time, but let me just show you, there are some things going on that are hopeful in trying to address that issue. And Governor Healy's first day in office, when she was first elected, her first action was to appoint a climate chief and create an Office of Climate Innovation and Resilience. And so she has put Massachusetts right in the lead in terms of the state level for beginning to address what we can do, which is a lot since we're number one, number two. And that's encouraging. The Cape Cod Commission has developed a climate action plan. You could check that out on their website. They have a lot of information about actions that individuals, towns, committees can take to help mitigate and reduce our carbon footprint. And Cape Cod, one of the things that the Center for Coastal Studies did, my group, was to create a thing called the Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative several years ago. And now that's another resource here on Cape Cod that provides information and conferences and resources for people who want to take action. And then you guys are doing great work with the Orleans Climate Action Network and the other committees. I'm proud of what we're doing here. And then Katie will talk a little bit about her work, but we have 10 programs within the Center for Coastal Studies, all of which in one fashion or another are trying to address some of the impacts of climate change on our water resources and natural resources here in the Cape. So what are the challenges going forward? Well, you can sense it's huge. This is an existential issue we're talking about. You know, it's not the end of the earth. It's not even the end of the world necessarily, but it's either going to be fundamentally changed for future generations in different parts of the world in a big catastrophic way for some, or the earth is going to be changed in a lesser way that we can adapt to and become resilient to. But those are the questions. Those are the challenges. So I just pose these questions. Can change happen at a scale and speed sufficient to slow climate warming? Scales. I mean, we're talking global scale, and we're talking about just a few years. For example, I mentioned the International Panel on Climate, IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change. Those scientists have set some targets for us, one of which says, if we do not cut global carbon dioxide emissions in half by 2030, we're going to have a long shot of doing anything beyond that to keep the 2 degrees Celsius target. Now, that's only 6 years away, right? That's what I'm talking about, urgency and speed with which these things have to happen. Can we adapt and become more resilient to what already baked in changes? That's a separate challenge. We have to, we talk about mitigating carbon dioxide, which is trying to slow the source of the problem, but we also have to be preparing to adapt to the changes that are already baked in and to become more resilient. There are cities that have trillions of dollars of real estate at risk as the sea level rises. And Boston is one of them. You've seen even on some regular high tide flooding days, the Fan Pier and those areas in South Boston where they continue to build new buildings. So can we figure out how to do that? Will the fossil fuel driven businesses and economies be willing and able to transition to renewable energy? The oil and gas companies have done studies 40 years ago, 50 years ago in some cases, that showed them what the results of burning fossil fuel will be in terms of climate change and climate warming. That data was out there. When Governor Healy was the Attorney General, she and several other states sued some of the oil and gas companies to get that data, and it's been proven. So they sat on it, just like the tobacco companies sat on their knowledge of how bad cigarettes are for a long time. So How are we going to change that attitude? Businesses are in this, and some of them are busy because they're making a lot of money off burning fossil fuels. But somehow by law or by our making demands or us changing our ways, we're going to have oil and gas companies leave billions of cubic yards of oil and gas in the ocean. I mean, in the earth. And then I won't even talk about this, but what about the moral, spiritual, and equitable issues with all of this? You know, what do we have a responsibility to the earth. We have a responsibility to other generations coming behind us. You know, what are all those issues? And are we ignoring them? Should we deal with them? So anyway, I just throw those out to be a little bit thought-provoking. What should you know and do? And here's what I'll end with. We need climate champions in every level of government, right? And I use this Inflation Reduction Act. President Biden oversaw the passage of the most important climate legislation ever in this country. And the climate, it's not named that, but in the Inflation Reduction Act, there are a lot of climate change tools and resources. So that is great, and we need more of that. And we need a Congress to back him up in the future to do more of that. Making climate responsible investments. Hopefully, some of you have pensions and retirement funds. You have power with those. You could invest those in pensions that do not support oil and gas companies. Okay? You could invest those same funds in companies that are pioneering innovative, climate-friendly, renewable technologies. And still make money, still have your retirement, but show your power. And by the way, let me back up to climate champions in the Congress. Right now, countries around the world subsidize fossil fuel industry to the tune of $700 billion a year. Right? In the United States, it's about 30 or $40 billion of our taxpayer money that gets handed over to the fossil fuel industry, on top of all the profits they're making at the gas pump. That has to change. So if we had a Congress and a president and leaders that would flip that switch, in this country, $30, $40 billion a year order to renewables, and globally, 700 billion. If that switch was flipped, a lot of progress could be made. And then just number three, what about our own individual carbon footprints? You may have heard that concept. What does our life, the way we consume, the way we buy, what we drive, how far we drive, that all produces carbon dioxide. That's our individual carbon footprints. So what can you do? Next car you buy, an electric car, and they're being produced quickly, and they're going to be available. And the charging stations infrastructure are being built all the way across the country, and there are electric trucks on it. Install solar heat, and put heat pumps in your house. It's an investment, yes, but it's an investment in the future, and there are lots of banks and the agencies that will subsidize and help you achieve that goal with the best financial offerings they can get. Consume less, waste less. That's a pretty obvious one, but you know, we are about 5% of the world's population. We consume about 30% of all the resources. So we have that option in our hands. Eat less meat. Sounds a little silly, but there are hundreds of thousands of acres of the Amazon being leveled, clear cut, so that more cattle can be raised to feed people meat around the world. We don't need that meat. We need the forests to stay in the Amazon to sequester carbon dioxide. Drive less, fly less, stay informed. Thanks for listening. Sorry to carry on, but it's a serious issue, guys.
Okay, thank you, Rich. Just a reminder for the people on Zoom, for everyone in the audience, if you have a question, to either flag me down or there's a microphone over in the corner just so that the people on Zoom can hear what's going on. Did we have any super pressing questions? Okay, again, we are going to do a panel with all of our speakers at the end, so just make a note of anything you'd like to ask them.
Great. Did I do
Looks good.
right?
Closer enough. to that.
Okay.
Is that good?
I know we're like
up
giving
to you.
TED Talks up here, guys. We're
Okay,
super techie today.
Yeah.
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 Okay, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Katie Castano, also from the Center of Coastal Studies. She is the director of the Land Sea Interaction Program. So go ahead, Katie.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thrilled to be here. Thrilled to see such a packed audience for a Friday afternoon. It's really, this is such an important topic and it's near and dear to, I think, all of our hearts. And I'm just really excited to see everyone here. As Shelley mentioned, I'm the director of the Land Sea Interaction Program. I'm a geologist, so this will be a little different. I spend a lot of my time in the salt marsh. Pretty much, I wasn't in the salt marsh today, but I was yesterday. Sometimes I roll up just full in the waders, but I decided to spare you, mostly for the smell. But I just wanted to talk a little bit today about some of the work that we've been doing with salt marshes, how salt marshes are a really important ecosystem, especially in regards to climate change. And then I will talk a bit more about some of the resources that the Center for Coastal Studies have available online that y'all can take advantage of and check out. So just to start, we know that salt marshes provide really valuable ecosystem services. And ecosystem services is a term for basically those services that the ecosystem can provide to people, these benefits that people can obtain from the ecosystems. A lot of different things, whether that's supporting things like biodiversity. If you've ever been to the salt marsh, you've seen all the osprey. It's beautiful. Provisioning, so things like we know plenty of juvenile critters. We know that shellfish all rely on salt marshes, regulating, and then cultural. Again, everybody loves to take a little kayak in the marsh, but I'm going to be talking especially about the regulating component of these salt marshes, which is particularly looking at things like coastal protection, flood control, and other ways that marshes can be used to, marshes help protect our coasts. First to start, though, we know that marshes have experienced centuries of natural alteration. So we know things like here is a picture of a marsh before and after Hurricane Sandy. We can see this big washover deposit right here. We know as marshes lose their vegetation, whether it's from sea level rise, whether it's from crab herbivory, they'll start to lose their stability and erode into the ocean. And we also know that winter storms, which we know have become in many cases more intense, can bring sediment, basically a big block, imagine a big iceberg when the marsh freezes and it moves the sediment and it puts it onto the marsh. So lots of different ways that the marsh naturally changes. But the big thing that we want to take away here is that salt marshes have experienced centuries of human alteration. So we know marshes have been, they've been ditched, they've been diked over centuries, whether that's in the 30s for mosquito control, whether that's like even the Herring River in the 1900s was restricted, and now they're starting to start the restoration process. Or here, even in the 1600s, marshes were used for agricultural food and hay for livestock. Marshes have been lost at a really alarming rate. And so here we can see here, this is our 1777 and our 1999. So this is, again, it's a pretty dated figure. But what we're seeing here is a really significant loss in salt marsh over centuries. And I think one of the things that I really spend a lot of time thinking about are storms. So we know that coastal storms can be really impactful, especially in these coastal communities where so many of us are so close to the water on this like beautiful ephemeral spit of sand that we all live on. And one of the big things that I really want to impart in here is that we know that coastal communities are growing more vulnerable to storm impacts. And so here, this looks like you're just saying, oh, well, the storms, there must just be more storms. This must be, why is there this big spike here? And what we're actually seeing is that if we were to normalize this by the economic loss, we're seeing that this big spike here is really from more wealth being lost here. This is kind of we're having more valuable and vulnerable coastlines are having more wealth. And so here, for example, this is from the Cape Cod chronology viewer. If that's something that you have never spent a little time with, I highly suggest you do. You can go through and look at aerial photos of basically anywhere on Cape Cod, 1938, 1955, lots of different places all the way through, and you can really see how your particular community has changed. And so here we're using the Namskakit Marsh just because I've done some work on it in the past. We're doing a little bit of work. We'll kind of refer back to this area. But this is 1938. This is 1952. And we get to 2020. Yeah, so we can see this is the whole idea. By the time here, it's not just that there's more storminess or coasts are more vulnerable, all of those things that are true, but it's that we just have a lot more people in this area that are a lot more vulnerable. And this is just one example, but for literally every talk that I do that includes this slide, I go through and I pull up similar aerial photos everywhere. It could be in Boston, it could be in Falmouth, it could be anywhere. One of the things that's really important too is that intense hurricanes are estimated to increase in frequency. And so this is looking at a series of model results, but basically what we're seeing here is by 2100, more than half of the storms that form in the Atlantic will be category 3 or higher. So we might not see more storms, where the idea is we might not see more storms. The climate model suggests that we'll probably keep the amount of storms will be about the same, but we are going to be seeing more intense storms. But let's go back to the marshes. So here, we see storms have impacted salt marshes for thousands of years. And so here, here's a team that I had a few years ago. We're taking a sediment core in a marsh, and this is my bread and butter. And the way I always like to describe it is, has anybody in the audience ever had a milkshake? Yeah, great. So have you ever had a straw in your milkshake and you've put the straw in the milkshake, your thumb on the top, and picked up the milkshake in the straw, right? Okay, so you've taken a sediment core, but I want you to imagine that in this case, the straw is a large aluminum tube and the milkshake is mud. So this is what you've done. We do this kind of in marshes all over New England. And the idea here is if they're close enough to the coast, when you have a storm in certain areas, you'll get a layer of sand. And all of these little stretches here are layers of sand. And you can go back in time. This is several thousand years, and you can actually reconstruct how frequent storms are. So you can say, okay, well, we know probably from the 1600s on about how many storms have impacted our coasts, but anything before that, we're not really sure. And I always like to say, if we know what happened in the past, we can better understand what might happen in the future. So the other thing, as I really want to get into here, is that salt marshes contribute to coastal resilience as storm buffers. And so I want you to see this. Oh, I went too far. It's a little preview. So here we're looking at the marsh edge. Here we're looking at the ocean, or no, here we're looking at the marsh edge right here. So imagine here's the salt marsh, and we're looking at our wave height, right? So as we go from the sea to the land, once these waves hit the marsh edge, they really, really dramatically drop. And basically, when you see that, you're reducing the wave power and anything that could really be kind of causing a negative impact on our coast. And we know this is the case. So Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita, they both made landfall at similar intensities in 2005. But Hurricane Katrina basically was a direct hit on New Orleans. We know how devastating it was. But Hurricane Rita, not too long afterwards, made a similar intensity storm, but had to travel through 30 to 50 kilometers of wetland before reaching a major populated center. So traveling through that wetland, we were really able to see the flooding and the waves decrease. And as a result, it wasn't nearly as devastating. We also know that salt marshes are largely resistant to storm damage. And this is an example from Hurricane Michael. I know we're in Florida here, but I don't think that really, I think this is still relevant here because Hurricane Michael was a Category 5 hurricane. So we're talking extreme storms. And we looked at all of these, basically all of the marshes in these areas, and we saw that after Hurricane Michael, only 2% of the marshes were damaged. So this is hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of marshes, and they are getting only 2% are damaged. And it was things like deposition on the marsh, fallen trees, vegetation loss. But what's really interesting is that though they might be resistant to these storm attacks, they might not be resilient. So only 16% of the marshes had recovered by 6 months after the storm. So the idea is marshes are really, really helpful in coastal protection. Once they're damaged, though, they do take longer to come back. However, when we think about this compared to, say, a bulkhead or any other sort of coastal protection, the salt marsh can in fact recover, as opposed to, if once your bulkhead is damaged, it's damaged and you have to repair it and it's no longer providing any source of coastal protection. So salt marshes face many, many other threats, and this is really a non-exhaustive list, whether it's that increased storminess, sea level rise, ditching and draining, tidal restrictions, lots of other things. But really, the idea here is that they can be a really important resource and a really important ecosystem for helping our better our climate resilience. This all comes back to marsh restoration. This is an example from the Herring River restoration plan in Wellfleet. And the whole point of this is that it's overwhelming, right? Like you should be like, this is too many words. I don't want to look at this slide. Great, that's the point. Which is really that when you're restoring your tidal range and your salinity, basically you're trying to get your marsh back to its normal function, its healthy function. You get all of these other things like increased habitat, increased public access, all of these really great things that all kind of connect to each other, right? It's all connected. So I wanted to give you just an example here. This is Namskakit Creek. There was a restoration in Namskakit in 2007. And basically they replaced a 1-foot culvert with a larger side-by-side set of box culverts. Unfortunately, due to a lot of different, components and things that were going on in 2007, it looks as though they hadn't really done a whole lot they weren't able to really get it open and get it really flowing, right? So what we're seeing here, we're actually using, this is data from the Center for Coastal Studies water quality monitoring stations, right? And so what's cool about this is we can go back, and this is just, I pulled this straight off the website, and there'll be a slide in here too, so get ready, because you can be your own scientist. But they have they have this really incredible data set taken by volunteers from 2006 to the present day, and in most of these sites, and they're all over Cape Cod. And basically what we're seeing here is we're looking at the salinity, and there isn't a whole lot of change, as you might hope, with this restoration. However, in other restoration places, in other spots where there are marsh restoration, we're expecting a really more dramatic look. But because we're in Orleans, this is unfortunately what we got. Maybe a point to put a pin in. But as I mentioned, if you're interested in these resources, if you want to look at these water quality sites, this is your website, capecodbay-monitor.org. I'm sure these will all be available. Yeah, okay, yeah, great. Y'all get them. You don't need to worry and write them down. But so here are all these water quality sites that the folks at the center are monitoring. Basically, you can see all around Cape Cod, just to give you a sense. And just to give you a sense, I'm zooming into Namskakit just for clarity, so you can all see what you would expect if you're interested and you say, okay, I want to know, what's the water quality site closest to my house? Like, I want to know how this looks. So lots of different things that you can look at here. And again, these are all sites that are collected monitored by the volunteers. So we're really, really grateful for our volunteers at the center. We see things, this is just for the year 2023. So things like temperature, changes in the temperature are pretty self-explanatory. Changes in nitrate, so that's looking at things like where agricultural sources, septic, fertilizer, all of these things are going into your nitrate levels. So that's a good way to monitor kind of how the system's doing in that regard. Looking at things like chlorophyll trend. So a chlorophyll trend is just that count of those, those green plankton and other algae in any sort of water system. So also useful to look at that. And then turbidity, which is really how clear the water is. So all of these things can really go into thinking about the health of your local areas. Another resource that's available from the Center for Coastal Studies is stormtides.org. This is specifically looking at flooding and pathways for flooding. And so again, we can go into the Namskakit area, and we can see here, we're just looking at the water depth. And I have over here, our total water level it goes from 10 to 11. So we're raising the water level by about a foot. And you can see here's the area here that we would expect to be flooded and at what depth. You move it up to, I believe that's 13 feet. And you can see here is one point, and that's basically a squeeze point. The idea is that right there, if you were to elevate this spot, you could prevent this area behind it from being flooded. This is a pathway for more flooding. And this looks pretty, pretty minor because I guess we're only increasing it by a few feet. But if you really crank this up here, oh yeah, and you can go right in and you can find out lots more information if you want. If you really crank this up here, you can see all of these points, all of these vulnerable areas. And folks at the Center for Coastal Studies have been doing this work for a while, and they've found that their results are very, very accurate, where they can find these kind of squeeze points, and that's basically that's that vulnerable spot where the flooding, if you were able to elevate it or prevent the water from getting through here, you could prevent flooding to kind of the rest of the area. The idea is to really kind of zoom in and see how can we maximize the results from our efforts. Oh, yep, and even more, if we dialed it even more, and you can see you have even more little squeeze points here. I wanted to do a brief interlude. This is not from the center. However, the Coastal Erosion Viewer, the Shoreline Change Browser, is also a really important resource. So if here we're looking at, this is long-term erosion rates and then short-term erosion rates on the Cape. You can look at this in this overview, but you can zoom in again. And you can see that you have areas here, you have transects, and this is, again, these long-term rates. So you can see this area here. We can see that it's eroding, but in a shorter term, the longer term is from the 1840s to 2018. But the shorter term, oh, maybe I missed. Okay, well, there's a shorter term, and you can see there isn't a major change. But I think it's very important. It's very useful to be able to zoom in to your coastline and say, this is what's happening. Because again, the whole idea here is that really having this knowledge of what's happening is the power to know how your system is changing over time. And then finally, this is a new resource from the center. It's called Map That Cape Cod. It's the Outer Cape Shoreline Management. It's really an incredible data center or data portal for all of this work where you can go in and you can see what's happening. A lot of their work is kind of stops at the East Tam zone for now, but this is, for example, just looking at how sediment might move along Cape Cod. Again, really interesting ways to kind of look at those details for you, just to go in and say, this is what's happening in my area, and that, I think we all hold really near and dear to our hearts. So just to take away, we know that salt marshes are really key ecosystems, especially in the face of climate change, and they're really key players in that idea of coastal resilience. And we do a lot of research, monitoring, and determining baseline data to assess changes and also assess success of any sort of restoration project. Here I am in Duck Harbor in Wellfleet with my field assistant, Tommy Tucker. We took a sediment core and it didn't come out of the ground and we were wrecked. Later, we came back with a truck jack and we were able to get it out of the ground. We actually switched our protocol to every time we went out, we brought the truck jack just in case. And then I guess the biggest thing to take away here too is that really many resources exist, many from the center, to assess how your neighborhood, your area, places that you hold really near and dear to you are available. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, for such a great presentation. I know I'm going to be looking at some maps later. I don't know about you guys. Do we have a question or two while we're transitioning to our next speaker? Okay, cool. We'll save them all for the end. That's great. So without further ado, we need to get this thing on your head.
Well, I can use this. Is that all right?
Perfect. So
Perfect.
without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mark Reel to the stage from the town of Orleans. He is the assistant town manager. So take it away, Mark.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank the Orleans Marine and Freshwater Quality Committee and the co-sponsors for organizing this event. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank the two previous speakers for handling the science piece of this because I am not a scientist. But just to start, I want to give you a bit of my background. So I'm the assistant town manager here in Orleans, and from a very young age, I was involved in government. I was elected locally at the age of 19, and I served in an elected position for 11 years. And so through those times, I ended up working in the state Senate as a legislative aide, and then went on to the Department of Fish and Game as their Director of Legislative Affairs, and then left state government because it's just spinning your wheels, and decided to go and work for the town of Plymouth as their climate resiliency and sustainability planner, which was very focused on the policy changes that were happening in that community. And then had this opportunity to come to Orleans as the assistant town manager, and really was planning to focus on climate-related issues until I found out I was working on your town meeting for the first 5 months of my 6 months here. So it's good to be able to get back into a focus on the climate-related issues. I look forward to doing that. I know maybe I was asked to do this maybe in March or April, and I thought, oh, that'll be plenty of time for me to get caught up with all the things that have been done here. But that's not the case. So bear with me as I go through. But I really want to kind of lay out this conversation as, segmented into what Orleans has done, which is a lot. And I'm not going to catch everything. And I know there's people in this room who are going to say, well, what about that? He didn't mention that. Well, we'll get there. But so what has been done, what is currently underway, and then what I'm most excited about is the future and where we're going to go. So just want to break that down. And then I'm going to ask a few questions throughout this presentation because it's my opportunity to engage with the public really for the first time I've been here, and just want to get a feel for your thoughts and where you are. So my first question is actually, how many of you are Orleans residents? So most of you. Okay, thank you. So just to get into some of the things that we have done, and it is ongoing as well. The town funds the Stormwater Management Stabilization Fund every year. And so just this May, there was a $207,000 appropriation from town meeting into that fund, and that funds stormwater management projects, which are so critically important for protecting our water resources and the health of our water bodies, both freshwater and coastal. And so there was about $1 million spent on projects in the last year. And some of those locations included Doan Road, Snow Shore Road, Champlain Road, Important Road, and only 25% of the 1 million was from the town of Orleans, while another 75% was from the USDA through a grant program through their Natural Resources Conservation Service. So I think it's important to note that that partnership with the federal government is so critical, and partnerships from our state partners, our regional partners, even our local nonprofit organizations are really important to our success here in Orleans and our success in combating climate change across the world, really. So my experience with state government is really helpful to all of you here in Orleans because I know where the resources are and I know who to go to for help when we need help. So it's really quite a benefit to know those pieces. Some of the smaller scale projects related to the water resources that I want to mention are, maybe the alum treatments that have been done on Pilgrim and Crystal Lake that have helped to reduce nutrients and protect public health. We may see those issues becoming more prevalent with climate change impacts, as well as the town's investments into monitoring water quality. So that's really important so that we know we can track the health of the water bodies that are in our community. Another project that I think, was at the forefront in the past before I got here, but continues to linger is the Nauset Beach Retreat. And so, in 2016, the community planned to fund a Nauset Beach management plan to understand what needed to be done to protect that important resource. And so I know a few years back when there was a catastrophic storm, really forced that issue to push the retreat forward. And so at this point, the dune has really done well. The dune system there is flourishing, and there's really one piece left to the retreat, which is the administrative building, which is kind of being consumed by the dune, which is, if you've seen that, it's quite interesting. So that's kind of the last piece, and that will be dealt with probably at the end of this season. I think it's also important to note that on the energy front, Orleans has been really a leader in recognizing that renewable energy is critical to mitigating the impacts of climate change. And so you've seen a variety of projects, solar projects in the community. There's a lot of ongoing discussions about adding solar to facilities to meet the needs of our municipal electricity use. And the select board has a goal of being energy independent by 2030, which will be utilizing renewable energy sources and reducing our dependency on fossil fuels. And I think that's a really thoughtful and progressive idea. You don't see that very often in most communities. That was something that I was kind of impressed by when I was coming here and looking at some of the goals of the select board. Just on the policy front, another thing that I feel Orleans has been a forward-thinking leader on is addressing the issues around pesticides and fertilizers and even tree protection. As you all know, in October 2022, town meeting voted to petition the legislature on special legislation to address the application of fertilizer in the community. That bill is H 874. And it's on the floor of the House, which means it could very well pass, and we'll know the fate of that bill in the next few months here, if not sooner. In 2023 of October, we had the passage of another similar bill that addresses pesticides. And so again, we'll also know the fate of that bill, and that bill is H 4481 if you're interested in looking that up. And then in 2010, the town had adopted a public tree bylaw, which protects public trees in the public right of way, which we know is so important for addressing heat island effect and ensuring that we are providing shade to residents and visitors when we see these extreme heat events come through, which are quite often. And I hear that just next week, we're expecting a heat wave, although maybe here on the Cape, we won't be dealing with the heat that the inland folks will be. So I think I just want to ask the audience a question about your thoughts about how the town is doing. So really the option is, do you think the town is doing enough or needs to do more? So if you'd raise your hand if you feel the town is doing enough to address climate change. Good to know. We don't even have to ask, do you think they need to do more? Because it was unanimous. What a great community. Always, everyone's on the same page. Perfect, thank you. So we can talk a little bit about now what we're currently working on. And I think you're all very well aware of the work being done on the sewer project through the Comprehensive Water Resource Management Plan. Currently, the project is in phase 2 of 16 phases, which will last through approximately 2067. We've funded the third phase final design at the May town meeting, but this is a really important project for water quality. And so it's a smart investment of the community to have made this step forward. And I know that it is challenging and the traffic patterns are a problem, but I think we're all going to get through it. And you can always reach out to me if you need something on that. We have resources in the community to help with answering questions. So yes, you can, because I have a work cell. So you can have that. But we're going to get off track, but we do have someone who's focused on providing residents with feedback. And so we just hired that person. It's only been a little less than a month. So you'll have that resource. But, as sea level continues to rise and we see groundwater levels increasing and interfering with septic systems, it's really important that folks are on the sewer system to protect our water bodies. Something that sure.
After the 16 phases are complete, how much of the town will actually be sewered?
60%. Thank you. Thank you for that question. And did anyone hear that question? Okay. Yeah, the question was how much of the town was going to be sewered after all of the phases are done? The answer is 60%.
When are all the things done?
2067. Okay. So something that was done recently at town meeting was to fund a beach management plan for Skakit Beach, which was similarly done for the Nauset Beach project in 2016. And, we're thinking ahead with that, right? There may not be direct issues right now at Skakit Beach, but we want to understand how we're going to be able to protect that resource and provide access in the future. And so town meeting funded it, but we've applied for an MVP grant, and we're hopeful we'll get that grant funds. And if not, we'll address it either way. Along the energy front, again, we're looking at 2023 in October, town meeting once again, investing in the idea of EV infrastructure. And so just last week, I've been working on this as part of my, background work, but there are going to be 2 fast chargers located at the Depot Square property on Old Colony Road. That project is going to cost $190,000. However, after all of the incentives, it's going to be $12,000. So it's a really great deal for us. And then there's 2 other projects that are underway on Nauset Beach. We're going to have 8 ports, level 2 ports, and at 139 Main Street, which is where the Cho is across from Town Hall, there'll be 6 charging ports there. And those will be, we've got $60,000 from the state in grant funds for those 2 projects. So help to reduce the cost to you folks. And I think something that is interesting is when we talk about level 2 charges, it's a slower charge than the level 3 fast chargers. But something I've noticed is that the technology is improving. And so the typical level 2 charger that I was seeing, because I'm an EV driver, was giving out about 7 kilowatts of power. And it would take me, if I was almost out of power in my vehicle, it would take about 8 hours to get a full charge. But what we're seeing now is some of the new technology is putting out like 19 kilowatts. So you're going to see a reduction in wait time. And even if you're at Town Hall and you plug in, a couple of those units will be like the 19 kilowatts. And so you'll get a meaningful charge just for, doing your business at Town Hall or participating in a meeting. And also the 139 Main Street chargers will assist the town in transitioning some of our vehicles to EVs. I mean, we do have some plug-in hybrids that were purchased, but I think that we need to be investing in full EVs. So leads me into another question for you all, which is how many of you drive an electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid vehicle? Okay. And how many of you that didn't raise your hand are seriously considering an EV for your next vehicle? Okay, good amount. Appreciate your participation because it is helpful for me. In addition to some of those things we talked about that are ongoing, Orleans has agreed to participate in this in the Mass Housing and Climate Innovation Center's All-Star program, which is municipalities across Cape Cod are sponsoring students at the college level, both undergrad and graduate level. And so we agreed to participate. There'll be 2 students from Boston College. And they're going to be working in the community to catalog municipal properties and infrastructure that will potentially serve as platforms for field testing innovative materials, products and technologies, and the end product of their work will be what they're calling an innovation opportunity atlas, which will be a layer in the GIS mapping for the Cape Cod Commission. And the audience for that layer will be government and academic and industry laboratories that are focused on climate resilience, climate mitigation, and affordable housing construction innovations that are going to make that leap towards a better construction field, right? So we're basically showing that we're willing to be on the ground and be a part of looking to the future in terms of materials and all of those things. So we're excited about that. Luckily, it's not a big strain on our staff. It's something that I thought really made a lot of sense to be able to be a partner in this. So we're excited to do that. And then really, as I mentioned before, it's the future and the things that I can work with all of you on that I'm most excited about. And so I talk about in Plymouth, one of the things that we did there was there were very many environmentally focused groups, and they were all doing their own things. And there were some, working overlaps with those groups, but I felt it was really important that we were all on the same page about what everyone was doing, whether it be the municipal government or the other variety of entities. And so we don't want to be duplicating efforts. And so I look forward to probably in the fall, really bringing everyone together in the same room and making that a routine thing so that everyone understands what we're doing at the government level and how we're going to work together moving forward. So that's something I'm looking towards. Building community resilience. I'm pulling some of these things from my time in Plymouth, but one of the things I've been talking a little bit about with some of our local groups is an invasive species mitigation program that focuses on training residents how to identify and remove invasive plant species just in your own yards, and then understanding how to properly dispose of that. And so building that base of knowledge is really important for any community to be able to really act appropriately. So I'm looking forward to really digging into that and working with the local organizations to build a program, which is now working in Plymouth. It's in its infancy, but we had brought a state botanist in to do some educational work. And what we did in Plymouth with disposal of these species is the transfer station set aside an area for people to drop off their invasives. They would be covered, and then the fire department had agreed to burn the pile after a certain point of time. So that's something we hope to do here. And then finally, really just planning for our community. In Plymouth, I worked to start the climate action plan. I really think that it's important for Orleans to have its own climate action plan. And I know that, the Cape Cod Commission has one for the region, but there really are differences amongst the communities that, Orleans is unique. And so having our own guide that is beyond just the municipal government and really includes all of you, all our businesses, everyone, and identifies the goals and strategies and specific actions that we can all take relative to mitigation and adaptation, I think is so important and really gives us all that clear focus, right? Because I talked about some of the things that we're doing around EV charging and around, the move towards EVs for our fleet and some of the other pieces, but we really need a specific plan so that we all know where we're going. So I'm looking to hopefully, we've talked to the town manager and it's been brought to some of the select board members, and I've shared it with others in the community and I've had positive feedback. So hopefully in the fall at town meeting, we could look at funding that project. So just to wrap up, I have one last question, which is how many people here are actively volunteering or contributing to a local or regional organization that is focused on climate change or the environment? Quite a few. Okay, well, I would say that if you don't, my call to action for you is please do what you can to help those organizations, because whether it be joining a town committee or contributing monetarily to one of those organizations or spending your time volunteering, it's really important for our community and for the region and for the larger, more broad issue of climate change and tackling those issues. So hope that you will think about that.
Mark, I just wanted to remind everyone, the Energy and Climate Action Committee for the town does have 2 openings for 2 associate members.
There you go. Thank you.
Oh, we've got one more question for you, Mark.
Hi.
Hi.
There are 2 things I'd like to address. One of them has to do with the erosion of the beaches. And I attended a talk by the head of the National Seashore, and I brought up the possibility of having reefs put out to critical places to cut down the pressure against the. His response was, "We're opposed to that." I said, "Why?" "Because it's not natural." And he said, "Besides, it's a federal issue, not the Cape."
Mhm.
So that left me a little frustrated about what's going on with the erosion. And while I'm looking out over the ocean, a friend of mine who's on a town committee said, out there are 2 parking lots under the water. And we're looking at what's happening to the Orleans Nauset Beach. The second thing has to do with trees. If you just look at the median divider on the highways, there are miles of nothing. And I talked to the state representative about having a program of tree planting along the medians. She said, "Oh, I'll turn that over to my staff." I haven't heard yet.
Right, right. Yeah,
So-
well, I mean, those are 2 issues that we are at the town level not quite able to grapple with, but it goes back to partnerships, right? So partnering and having conversations and maintaining open communication with our state and federal government to, bring those issues forward when we can is really what we can do on that. So good that you brought that up. I appreciate it.
And
I think we are losing a lot of trees due to English ivy. If you drive along, they're killing the trees with no one taking any responsibility for dealing with that. And it's a crisis.
Yeah, well, that goes back to what I was mentioning about kind of developing that community resilience and through knowledge around invasives and ensuring that biodiversity is at the forefront of our minds. Especially to me, that's something all of you can do day to day at your homes and talking with your neighbors and building that web of knowledge is going to be really important. So that issue is something that could be addressed through that.
And
Thank you.
going off of erosion, if you guys grab one on your way out, we have a spectrum handout. You can also contact our coastal process. Thank you. Our coastal processes and hazard specialist. His name is Brian McCormick, and he would love that I'm giving his name out. So please talk to him. He is all sediment. He'd love to talk to you about erosion. All I can say about erosion is that if you put in a protective measure like a revetment like that, sand is going to go somewhere else. So, again, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to put you in contact with someone on our team that knows more about that than I do. So I think with that, we are going to transition to a panel up here. So if you guys want to grab some snacks while we're doing that, please feel free.
Yeah, I guess it's not going, it's off cycle. Sorry. For question and answer in the audience, please wait for a handheld mic, or you can come to the mic in the back room there where Akeem is. And otherwise the Zoomers don't hear anything that's being said. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you have a question?
Well,
Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Hakeem. I'm with John in the Energy and Climate Action Committee. I have to be honest, I don't specifically have a question, but I have to be candid. With the Energy and Climate Action Committee, we try to never miss an opportunity to advocate. So I really appreciate the attendance and I appreciate this opportunity. I just wanted to comment, first of all, on one of the slides that I think was probably, to me, one of the most important. It's a slide that Rick Delaney showed about what can we do? And it's a typical question because when we're faced with all of the catastrophes and everything that could happen to us, each one of us want to do something, but it can be intimidating when we read on the slide, buy a heat pump, buy an electric car, fly less. So, a strong mentor of mine told me once that the way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So perhaps some of those bites are with respect to heat pumps, etc. It starts with educating ourselves. I don't think we would advocate for anybody to go and run and spend $10,000, $20,000 on a heat pump, but it would be very important to be aware of the type of heat pumps that we might need if our furnace breaks, the type of incentives that the government, either at the federal or state level, offers, the net cost to us, so that when and as that furnace breaks down and we're in an emergency situation, we're already educated and we can move in and do the right decision, not only for our budget, but also for the environment. Same thing with electric cars. I mean, we've frequently tried to consider buying an electric car, but what's intimidating for that is really, if I'm going to need to take a 200-mile trip, day trip, am I going to be able to recharge my car easily, or am I going to be stuck somewhere? So part of it is actually among the things that the town of Orleans is doing, which is really developing as many EV stations, preferably level 3, because unless you can stay away from your car for 8 hours, that's really your only solution. So it's not just up to the individual to make the decision. It's really, it takes a village. It takes the community, it takes the state to make those decisions as easy to do. Part of it is infrastructure. Another things we can do, yeah, we can fly less. We can try to fly less. But
it's important also to be aware that private jets, yachts, those are really high consuming items that we can try at our small scale to lobby against. It's funny, I was hearing on TV Charles Barkley humoristically complaining that during his age, he used to fly commercial. He says now all of these pros, they fly on their own private jets. So this is something that we can live with, but the more we speak up about it, the better off we are. Mark mentioned grants. I mean, it's interesting that the EV station cost us less than 10% net cost to the town. So, we are so unaware of all of the low-hanging fruits that the legislation, the government, between the Inflation Reduction Act and other, the infrastructure building legislation, make available to us. The only ingredient that's required is identifying the needs of the town and linking that with a potential grant that's available. We're very heartened because pretty soon we're going to have a energy sustainability manager supporting the town of Orleans, only 1 day a week, but it's a good start because the interesting thing is for many, many cities here in the state who temporarily hired a sustainability manager for maybe initially thinking 6 months or maybe a year, that happened 20 years ago, and those guys are still on the payroll. So they way more than pay for their salary. These are low-hanging fruits that if we pass up on them, somebody else will. So, sustainability manager. We're fortunate in the town of Orleans, a little plug here, that we have a select board that's really very, very aware of climate change and very supportive of all of our activities. So again, it's a very important element in that teamwork. Volunteers. An interesting data point that I'd like to throw in here. The town of East Ham recently ran a survey to determine the interest of their community in climate action, in climate action activities. So it was very simple. It was just a postcard, as I understand it, that was mailed in everybody's mailbox, and then they got over 400 respondents. So what a wonderful way to get the confirmation to the select board that indeed the community is behind them, that all these decisions that need to be made have the support of the community. When we introduce a new idea to the town meeting, people are not necessarily taken off guard. They have already given some thought, and it makes that decision-making so much easier.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. I think that was one of my first questions as well, was how can members of the audience get involved and what actions they can take? So I'd like to give our panelists a second to speak on that.
Thank you. I'm sorry, maybe I overspent my time on the microphone, but those were pretty much the ideas I wanted to cover. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll just pass the mic down the line.
Can I interject a question from a Zoomer saying, can we get the presentation and the links specifically to Kate that Katie presented? The entire Zoom stream will be posted on the town website, and with Katie's permission, we'll put her PowerPoint up as well.
I just wanted to add, if you put your email, if you're interested on the clipboard, we're going to send you by email both a link to the Zoom and also some of the other great maps and materials that our speakers shared.
So the question was, why are partnerships so important? Oh, okay. So what actions can people take? Okay, so I think I alluded a little bit to that towards the end of my presentation and talk, was that just getting involved in any way is so important, because so often you see the same people doing something on a variety of different committees. And so for us, it's get involved in a local committee. As you heard John say, there's 2 openings as associate members of the Energy and Climate Action Committee. So, being involved in that way is so important. I think anything you can do is helpful.
Thanks, Mark. Earlier, Mark suggested you join a local group. Well, the Center for Coastal Studies would like to have you be a member. We have brochures right up there. You can sign up, and your support will help Katie continue to do her great work. So that's one thing you can do right off the bat. And I was really happy to hear Mark's review of what we have done as a town already, which is impressive. I think my very first comment when I stood up there was a lot of the most important actions happen at the local level. And we can have the international climate change and all that stuff I talked about and the state setting good standards, but we can make a difference in our town right here, and we're doing it. And I like what you've laid out for the future, Mark. So if you are informed about that, what Mark needs to get those things through town meeting is for us to show up and be educated and vote the right way, as we have been doing. Was not too many years ago, we missed a lot of opportunities to put solar panels on some of the buildings we were building. But if you think about that and you think about how much of an unbelievable ecosystem we have, and if we can, like Katie suggested, restore those natural systems, water, salt water to fresh water, we have ponds that should be connected ecologically to the ocean. We have lots of great things, but we need to be proactive in taking care of them. So.
Thanks, Rich. So as Rich mentioned, you could become a member of the Center for Coastal Studies. You could also volunteer for the Center for Coastal Studies. There are so many volunteer opportunities, kind of any level of commitment, whether that just be a time or physical ability. So you could come out to the marsh with me and swing a sledgehammer. That's an option. If maybe that's not your style, you could definitely connect with the water quality team. If you wanted to be in charge of going out and taking water samples a few times a month, that's really, really important. And you get to take a nice little beach walk. Oh, it's a dream. Or the marine debris program is really robust. They have beach cleanups that happen all over the Cape, pretty much all year round. Lots of other things. If you don't want to be outside, our benthic ecologist has a lot of work for you. You could help her pick out little invertebrates. One of our volunteers likes to describe it as yoga for my brain. Feels very meditative. There's lots of options, but we're really excited to have you kind of in any capacity. And again, it all does come back to really knowing what's going on and in your area, in your neighborhood, and then thinking about good ways to give back and take part.
Thank you all. I have a couple questions here, but I wanted to see if anyone in the audience, because I can keep asking questions, but.
Maybe it's more of a comment, but I'd be happy to have your reactions. One is, we were talking about don't drive so much and the difference between taking private jets and taking, commercial. But I'd also like us to think about how we drive is in a way similar to taking private jets. So anything more that people can do to encourage local transportation to be better and more reliable and to support that means that somebody can consider living without a car. And I'd also like to say, on a bigger scale, a lot of the problem is the greed of corporations. So somebody mentioned, lobbying against private jets, and that's one thing, but you can also think about, in terms of your investment, whether you can be an active investor challenging what's going on, any opportunities that you might have to challenge, to put other values besides making money to where corporate action is occurring.
I think we'll come back to you. Let's give our panel speakers a chance to answer that.
I agree with all your comments and Hakeem's comments. There are a lot of great, just shows how many people in this audience are already tuned in and doing good stuff. So thank you guys for that. I alluded to this, but it does come down to the corporations have an awful lot of influence, not just but the fossil fuel industry is the one I've focused on. They have an incredible amount of influence over our political system. They have the money, and I mentioned the subsidies that they get out of our government. That has to be broken because they still get to drill for oil and gas on public lands. They go for, they've been emitting their waste product into the air for a long time. And yet they produce goods that we all buy, and we sort of are complicit in a way with that big corporate structure. So that's why I said it's one of the sides, a fundamental change in our values and our lifestyle, as you alluded to. Do we have to drive a big car when there's only one of us? Can we drive a smaller car or a more electric car? Yes, those are decisions. Those are individual decisions that reflect our awareness of the situation, our carbon footprint. So we can make a difference. I really do believe. I think, a lot of what I probably said sounded ominous. It is, and it is on one level, and it's existential on another level. But I am very optimistic about societies changing the way we are living, reducing our carbon footprints. The question is, can we do it fast enough to avoid some real major disruptions to our systems?
I would just address your comments about, maybe people driving their individual vehicles, right? And so having a reliable public transportation that provides you the ability to go to the places you want to go is really important, right? If you don't have that, you're going to use your vehicle. And I think that this isn't a local issue necessarily. It's really a state and regional kind of issue. But you look at the city of Boston, and they're pushing people to use public transit, and yet they're providing a subpar system that doesn't work. So you can't expect people to use a system that doesn't work, right? So we need to be engaging with our regional and state partners about ensuring that the services that they're offering are meeting the needs of our residents.
Okay, we're going to come back to you. We've got a question over here, and then we're coming over to you.
I'm just curious about the charging stations in town. Do individual users have to pay for those? So it's a credit card?
Yes. So right now there's only one charging station that's operated by the town, which is at Depot Square, but individuals do have to pay to use those. So it's on an app on your phone, and you start the charge with your app.
Thank you. Coming over here now.
I just wanted to follow up on the transportation question. I've had a lot of issues with the Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority because they stop their buses at 9 o'clock at night. And I worked with J1 students for 17 years, and they had no way of getting home. But in fact, they have committed to making an all-electric, all of their vehicles will be electric within the next few years. And they have also started a new kind of service for the Lower Cape that I can't give you all the details about, but you can now call for a pickup and so on. So it's making it easier for us to not use our cars as much as it used to be.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't know about that. I'm talking about Plymouth. I live in Plymouth, and we have the Gatra that you can call. I see them at my apartment all the time. Did anyone? Oh, one more question. Okay, and then I'm going to ask our panelists a couple things.
Hi, John Londa. I had a question for Rich. So I was at a seminar that was done in Chatham in October, and there was a lot of discussion about sea level rise. And they were throwing out 4.5 feet of sea level rise by 2070 as an expectation. Do you think that's conservative, or is that kind of worst case?
It's not out of the question. It's probably closer to the worst case scenario. Remember, I tell you, if we do not succeed at keeping the average temperature from rising more than 2 degrees Celsius, if we start to go to 2.5, 3, then we're going to get that kind of sea level rise. And So it all correlates to how well we respond to the keeping the temperature down. But that scenario might seem like science fiction, or might have a few years ago, but it's not. There are other models that say it could be even higher in some parts of the world, more than 4 feet, 4, 5, 6. So it's been rising about a foot every century historically, and that's speeding up, almost doubling in some cases. So those are real numbers. Those are potentially real numbers.
I'm an older person, as you might be able to tell. Since I was a child, I've been in love with cars that go fast and make noise. And that's what we did back then. And there was a rule that's talked about NASCAR is that the cars that win on Sunday sell on Monday. The point I'm getting to is I love the Indy 500. I've been there about 4 or 5 times. If they announced today that next year's season would be run with electric cars, you would see a creative genius scrambling to come up with the most efficient device with the most power to produce something that'll last 500 miles, and they would beat the deadline, and the world would love it. I would love it.
Okay, well, I have a question for all of you. So we've been throwing this partnerships out a lot. Can the three of you speak a little more to the partnerships in your line of work and why those are so important in building climate resilience?
Yeah, so I did allude to partnerships being critical, and it's really comes down to funding, because coming up with solutions to local issues requires a lot of money to do what we want to do. And we really rely on state and federal revenues and resources to accomplish those goals. And so paying attention to where the dollars are coming from and what programs are available, because there are many, many programs out there, and tying them, I think Hakeem mentioned tying them to the needs we have locally is really important. So for us in town hall, we're usually looking at state and federal programs to fund, well, you could even argue county programs down here to fund some of the projects that we're doing. So that's the partnership piece that I pay attention to.
Well, that's our fundamental operating procedure, process at the centers. We partner with everybody. You know, we have a lot of resources. We have 50 people working at the Center for Coastal Studies. We have wonderful colleagues of Katie's who do other kinds of science, but even that's not enough. No one entity, no one group has it all covered. So we have to we have to complement and coordinate and partner with every government, nonprofit, people, business. The business community is, I've kind of made out the fossil fuel business people to be the villains, but they also could be creative. That example of the Indy 500 is creative. You know, why not? We have to challenge our industry to be yeah. Good stuff. Katie,
Well, as these two have said, I mean, partnership is absolutely essential. I mean, I couldn't do any of the work that I do without the partnerships. And I think the big thing to take away here for me is that, you know, research can't exist in a vacuum. So I do a lot of work in a lot of marshes all around Cape Cod, but I do that through partnering with the Park Service, partnering with APCC, partnering with different towns, and through gathering all of that knowledge. So I don't know all the ins and outs and the intricacies of different places, but the people that I partner with do, and we're able to have these conversations and then move forward with really innovative research plans.
Thank you all. I do want to be mindful that it is a beautiful Friday afternoon in the summer. So with that, I have one more thing for all of you, and then I think you guys can mingle with our speakers. But can you all give me like one big takeaway from today of like elevator pitch, go out and do this? Okay.
So one of my favorite hobbies is going for a little vacation on Google Earth. So I would love for everybody to go home and check out some of these maps because I think it's so important to be able to put where you live, sometimes precisely down to, the block, the corner, the intersection, and see what's happening and what we already know about precisely where you live.
I would ask all of you to go home and Google carbon footprint and find out what your carbon footprint is. These websites will take you through a series of questions. What kind of car do you drive? How many miles do you walk? What do you buy? Very interesting stuff. Check off the boxes, put some numbers down, and it will tell you individually how many pounds of carbon dioxide each of you put into the air every year. Once you know that, you can start to take some actions. Buy a different car, drive less, whatever it is, and then do it again in 6 months or do it again a year and see if you can reduce your own individual carbon footprint. That would be great. And once you do that, tell your neighbor and tell your kids and have the kids tell their neighbors. And if everybody in the country knew what their carbon footprint was and took action, we could make a big difference.
I would say follow the Town of Orleans Facebook page because we're going to be using that as a platform to push messaging out and so, especially as we look forward to a climate action plan and being involved in those different areas. And then I'd also say, as I mentioned, this invasives program, go home and start to study up on your invasive species so you're ready to participate.
Excellent. Well, with that, I want to thank, did you want to say a couple words? I want to thank, thank our speakers. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank our Snow Library staff, and I want to thank Mary and Valerie for hosting us today. Did you have anything else you'd like to say?
I just wanted to encourage folks, we have some great resources and materials from our co-sponsors. If you're interested in invasive species removal and how to plant native plants, there's some great materials both from the Orleans Conservation Trust and the Orleans Pond Coalition, who are co-sponsors. The Orleans Climate Action Network has a great climate repair kit that can help you figure out how to put heat pumps and solar in your home or switch to electric vehicle and who can help you do that. Anyway, there's great stuff over there, so please help yourself. Please sign the, and I guess you could put in the chat box if you're on Zoom. If you share if willing to share your email or put it on the clipboard, we'll send you some follow-up with some great maps and resources. So thank you all. And Carolyn Kennedy. Carolyn Kennedy asked me to suggest that you all volunteer to be